This episode is about the number 24 team on the Juggernaut Index, the Kansas City Chiefs. NFL teams should be allowed to use the term rebuilding only for a short period. After a season or two, the word becomes a punchline, not a strategy. The Kansas City Chiefs are entering dangerous territory as their multi-year rebuilding period has morphed into a culture of losing. They've won just 10 games over the past 3 seasons. They haven't averaged 20 points per game since 2006, and they haven't won a playoff game since 1993. These are lean times. During the offseason, the Chiefs hired new coordinators on both the offense and the defense, which should tell you, in the clearest possible terms, that everything is broken. Well, okay, almost everything. There's clearly nothing wrong with Jamal Charles. According to the Fantasy Expert Style Guide, I'm supposed to insert a Charles in Charge joke here. Instead, let's just link to a picture of Willie Ames in aerobics attire and call it a day. Last year, during the final 4 weeks of the regular season, Charles was Fantasy's second highest scoring running back. He averaged 164.5 rushing yards from weeks 14 through 17, and he reached the end zone 4 times. He plays at a speed few can match. Over Kansas City's final 8 games, Charles had 5 scoring plays of 40-plus yards. If you owned him in the second half, there's a decent chance you won your league. Unfortunately, Charles' 2010 workload is a tricky thing to forecast. The Chiefs signed veteran Thomas Jones to a 2-year deal back in March, and he's had at least 290 carries in each of his past 5 seasons. Jones is a high-mileage back who turns 32 in August, so you can't reasonably expect him to receive as many touches as Charles. But he's a threat to steal goal line carries, thus limiting Jamal's scoring potential. Still, Charles managed to rush for 1,120 yards on just 190 carries last year. That's 5.9 yards per carry. And he was barely a rumor in Kansas City before the Larry Johnson suspension. He's a home run threat who's not dependent on red zone work for his scoring. Over a full season, if Charles receives even a modest increase in touches, let's say 230 carries and 45 receptions, you'll love the results. He'll easily justify his current mock draft central ADP of 23.7. Draft him with confidence. Jones will be off the board earlier than most of the non-starting rotational backs with an ADP of 89.8, primarily because he's a solid brand name coming off a very good season in New York. The Chiefs' offensive line has been miserable in recent years, but the left side isn't so bad. Brandon Albert, Brian Waters, and the team added vets Ryan Lilja and Casey Wigman via free agency. There's hope for the ground game. Matt Castle returns as Kansas City's starting quarterback, coming off a thoroughly unimpressive season. He started 15 games for the Chiefs in 2009 and managed to reach 300 yards only once versus Cleveland in Week 15. He finished with fewer than 3,000 passing yards. His completion percentage was just 55%, and he tossed as many picks as TDs, 16. If you're a Chiefs fan who's worried that your team may have invested $63 million on the 2008 version of Billy Volek, then, well, yeah, that's a valid concern. Castle should certainly benefit from the O-line enhancements and the tutelage of coordinator Charlie Weiss, so it's too soon to write him off. In standard format fantasy leagues, however, he's not a starter. Now, if you were involved in fantasy in 2004, then of course you know the Volek story. He put up back-to-back 400-yard games in weeks 14 through and 15 and then fell off the map. Like Volek, Castle delivered a pair of 400-yard performances for the 08 Pats, weeks 11 and 12, but he also closed the season on 3 solid performances. It's not a perfect comparison. As a group, Kansas City receivers led the league in drop passes last year by a wide margin, 48, and Dwayne Bowe tied for the individual lead despite only appearing in 11 games. So this is not exactly a sure-handed group. Bowe is nonetheless a gifted player who's just 1 year removed from an 86-catch, 1,022 yards campaign. It sounds like he's taken the off-season work a bit more seriously this time too. Entering his age 26 season, there's still time for him to make the leap into the upper tiers at his position. He figures to be one of the NFL's leader in targets in 2010. Chris Chambers somehow resurrected his career in Kansas City last year after the Chargers cut him loose mid-season. He finished with 608 receiving yards and 4 TDs with the Chiefs, a performance that earned him a 3-year deal worth up to $15 million with 5.9 guaranteed. Anyone who owned Chambers in 2006 will never, ever go back. The rest of you are free to draft him. But understand that he's on the wrong side of 30. He's tied to an uninteresting quarterback, and he just got paid. Buyer beware. Behind Bowen Chambers on the depth chart, you'll find one interesting name, Dexter McCluster, a rookie, and one interesting spelling, Jeremy Urban, a veteran. McCluster was officially a running back at Ole Miss, though he lined up all over the field. At 5'8", 165, he's clearly undersized for the NFL, and he lacks elite speed, with a 4.58 at the combine and a 4.44 at the pro day. The Chiefs will likely try him in the Wildcat, but he'll get most of his work as a receiver. And since this offense probably can't support 3 ownable fantasy wideouts, limit your expectations. He and Urban will fight for scraps in a low-yield attack. Neither player needs to be drafted in standard fantasy leagues. In dynasty formats, give rookie tight end Tony Moyeki a look. He's a terrific blocker and an NFL-ready receiver. Injuries have been the only significant issue for the third-round pick. If healthy, he'll force his way into a starting role. The KC defense has, of course, been atrocious in recent years, finishing 30th in yards allowed in 2009 and 31st in 2008. Coordinator Romeo Crennel may actually face a greater challenge than Charlie Weiss. You won't draft his team defense in any fantasy setup. The IDPs to own are rookie DB Eric Berry, linebacker Demario Williams with 117 tackles in 09, and linebacker Tamba Hali with 8.5 sacks. Berry is really the only name that belongs to that group on a roster in a smallish IDP format. If you'd like to make a case for any other Chiefs, or you're that hooded zombified fan pictured above, please join us in the comment. The floor is now yours.